Welcome back, brand new Take Aim podcast, and this week I am happy to have Curt Headington back on from Xpedition Archery. If you guys have followed the show for the past while, Curt's been on several times, and last year we had him on, after he killed some really nice deer. This year we're kind of going through that August checklist of like, hey, season's around the corner, what do we do? But Curt is, hunting a new farm this year, so we kind of run down some of the ideas and thoughts behind how he's going about this new property, from food plots to access to tree stands to cameras to scrapes, you name it. It's a great show. Hope you guys enjoyed. There's so many good nuggets of information in this podcast that it's for everybody. You will learn something. So make sure you tune in to everything Curt says, because it's just always something in there that Curt says that just kind of opens your eyes. So hope you guys enjoy. And as always, if you had not had the chance to download Huntstand, make sure you do so. It is one of the best mapping features apps out available today. From property info to weather, you name it, everything is in this app. Even some really cool content like media that they put out, throughout the year. Huntstand just does a great job like that. So it's one of my favorite apps, and it's one that I use just religiously every single day. So use the code TAKEAIM10 at checkout to upgrade to Huntstand Pro. And as always, deer season never ends. We'll see you guys again next week. All right, guys, we are live, brand new Take Aim podcast. Excited to be back. Excited to get another show out, and man, super excited. We're getting close here. Counting down the days. We're at like 50-something now. But excited to have my buddy Curt Headington back from Xpedition Archery with us today. And Curt, man, what's going on in Northeast Iowa?
Hey, Brandon, thanks for having me back. Same thing, man. We're all chomping at the bit. We're just prepping, right? I mean, this is kind of the dwell zone time for us. We just wrapped up our fall green plots on all the farms, and now I don't want to say sit back and watch the cameras, but I'm going to kind of say it's sit back and watch the cameras time, because our deer, we'll start seeing some deer go hardhorn here just in the next, 10 days. And if you went 20 days out, virtually all of them will be hardhorn. And not that I don't care about velvet pitchers, but it's all about the hardhorn pitcher, when you're targeting, specific deer, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yep. And, one of the reasons today, we talked, off air here a bit, but, to do this podcast was kind of just go through the paces of what we're doing this time of year. And Curt, you kind of have the luxury to have, maybe a couple farms to where you can do some of the cool stuff like doing food plots and then, getting ready to check that intel to see who's here and what kind of backlog of deer you have. So do you kind of get a little more excited in August, Curt, than you do in July? Because, velvet is one of those things, they're in bachelor groups, and it always takes that step here to figure out who we're going to have left on the farm, you know what I mean? So we're getting close to that point. So do you kind of wait till late August to kind of say, like, you know what, I know this guy's going to stick around, or, whatnot, as soon as the velvet comes off? Because sometimes they go incognito and disappear.
And I think we've even touched on this, and dang sure you've touched on this with other guys, through the years doing the podcast, Brandon, but I don't think any single person really has the algorithm that says, hey, when a deer is 4, if you have him, he's going to be there at 5, or vice versa. I think there's a lot of things that play into that, right down to literally each deer's personality as far as, how big is their range and what is their core, and I think there's a difference. I think, I've heard a lot of stats on this, but I mean, I've heard, a deer's range might be the equivalent of 900 acres, but his core is going to be, 60, right? 80% of his time he stays on a 60-acre chunk, but like come rut and that kind of thing, he might be, roaming a mile every direction, that sort of thing. Now, my experience through the years, especially once I got serious about trying to kill mature deer, I've always said you need connecting dots. And all I mean by that is this. It's one thing to have a deer shed antlers because he was at least there and wintered, right? And food can change that. Crop rotation can change that. It's a whole nother when it's like, okay, now I have his shed. and then you got cameras out. And like I usually start running cameras early July-ish, and I never have high expectations because you kind of hit the nail on the head. You know, they're running in bachelor groups, and gosh, if there aren't soybeans around my farm that year, or if I don't have soybeans on it, those bachelor groups are out eating green. So odds are you're going to find them in a bean field or maybe on a hay field. But if you don't have those features per se when they're running in the bachelor group, you may not get his velvet picture, right?
Right.
But the second that velvet comes off, or shortly thereafter, they do move into their fall range, and then that's where, you know, the old adage, the chess game begins. Because when I talked about putting the pieces together, that's exactly what I'm talking about. So if you have a deer that you literally have his shed antlers, you get his picture when he's in velvet, and you get his picture when he's in hardhorn, I would move your odds to at least 80% that that's a deer that you can absolutely kill on that farm. Now, if you have one of the three, I think your odds are low. You know, maybe 20%. If you have two of the three, I'd give you 50-50 odds. But when you can put all three of those things together, like, oh my gosh, he plumb lives here. This is where he's at. Then it's a matter of just figuring out where's he bedding, where's he eating, and how do I get in the middle or create a funnel to basically make him walk by me.
Yeah.
So I didn't mean to get long-winded in that explanation, but there isn't an algorithm, and that's why every year it's fun. Like, certainly you recognize some deer grow so much you can't even believe it, and then other deer kind of stay the same. So every year is a new year. The one thing I'll say about this year, it does seem like year over year, at least the deer I'm hunting here in Iowa, it looks like a lot of them made some fairly substantial jumps.
Wow.
And that's exciting.
Yeah.
So
what would you contribute that to this year, Curt? I mean, compared to the last couple, did you guys get a little more rain at the right times to, like, make sure we didn't get EHD or anything like that, or was it just a combination of, like, the perfect summer and a light winter?
I think all that plays into it, Brandon, but like for sure this year we didn't have a super late winter and we didn't have a super rough winter. I think it'd be average. I'm saying that without any, data to back it up, but just from having lived here for 40 years and what I think of in recent memory, I would have called our winter average. I would have called our, the spring green up, I would have called that on time, like it wasn't late.
Right.
So I think all of that plays into it. And then interestingly, they would say we're in a fairly severe drought here. Now, overall, we haven't had what we normally have through a growing season, but we've had very timely rain. So like none of the row crops look bad. The corn never curled, the beans are lush. And it's almost like they were just on the verge of stuff is going to start looking rough, and then boom, we got, a half inch or 3/4 of an inch of rain. So I think it's just kind of been an optimal year. It was dry, but we got timely rains. Everything's lush and green. We had a light winter. We had a decent spring. Like, I think we just got lucky. Like the moon and stars kind of aligned this year, and it seems like the deer that I recognize year over year all made pretty substantial jumps. And I mean, that changes, deer to deer, but I mean, noticeable jumps. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, for sure. So your farm, let's say, and some of the other ones you hunt, what have you done as far as like dialing in those food plots, and when are you kind of ready to like really bust out those cameras and really kind of move them into situational spots where you may be hunting?
It's literally right now. I mean, even starting tomorrow, Brandon, I'm going down to one of the farms to start honing in, right? So I guess it will be 2 weeks tomorrow. It was the last weekend in July. I was down there and got all the food plots prepped and fertilized and planted and cultipacked. And I did it because the weather was perfect. It was actually really dry, and I was concerned that we weren't going to get timely rain. And lo and behold, they sat, I think it was 5 or 6 days dry, and then we got a little shot of rain, and then last weekend we literally got like a 2.5-inch soaker. So I'm fully expecting to walk onto the farm, and those food plots should all look like, perfectly green carpet right now with fresh seed germinating and coming up out of the ground. So that's all happening, and now it is the hone in. So, like tomorrow, as an example, I'm going to go onto that farm. I'm putting up 7 reveal trail cameras, and with the purpose that everywhere I'm putting them is going to be intel that would lead me right up to our opening day, October 1st, in hopes of patterning, one of my big deer.
Right.
And that's really what I'm going to be doing tomorrow is, the strategy on where do I need cameras, when historically do I start getting pictures of, specific deer, how do they use the farm, when they use it, all those, puzzle pieces will start going together tomorrow, and then the intel I'll capture over the next couple months or, the rest of August and all of September is what ultimately will tell me, Curt, you need to be there, the first cold front or the first northwest wind, you better be there and be hunting on, this food plot or that food plot or in this funnel. So, yeah, this time of year is exciting for me because based on what the cameras show me now, I'll start transitioning into a fairly heavy scrape regimen towards the end of August, early September, but about the same time they're shedding or they're all shed out, and I'm talking the velvet, of course. I'll start with the mock scrapes and putting scrape fix on the ground and trying to get them specifically somewhere in front of a camera so that they can pose a little and hopefully start setting the stage for how I would hunt them.
Yeah, that's right. So, Curt, run us through that situation and just kind of how you do that. Are you meticulous about, trying to keep your feet off the ground, so to speak? Do you use a side-by-side or e-bike to go in, and do you use like a hemp rope, or do you do anything special for the scrape, or just let Mother Nature do its deal?
I've kind of done, to answer the question broadly, Brent, I've done all of that through the years. And the one thing, I don't want any listener to think that scent isn't a huge deal, but I also think there's a very distinct difference between human scent right now and human scent come hunting season, because they turn into totally different animals when that testosterone starts pumping, right? They get a lot more instinctive. Right now their guard's down, they're just kind of lollygagging around, and at least here in Iowa, there is a fair amount of activity just in general with all the agriculture. They constantly see tractors and farmers and side-by-sides and the big sprayers going, and all of that stuff kind of contributes to it. So I don't really believe in socializing your deer, or, you hear people talk about that. But I do think you don't have to be nearly as unintrusive right now. That starts becoming important when they're hardhorn, in my opinion.
I agree.
But that said, when I go in to make a mock scrape, no, I'm not crazy or, spraying down head to toe and treating it like I'm hunting. I'm not. I'll roll in there either on my e-bike, or on a side-by-side, my side-by-side, I'll roll right up to wherever I'm going to do the work. I might be banging in a T-post to hang a camera on, or hang, I love scrape sticks. I don't know if that's a product you're familiar with, but, it basically allows you to put a scrape anywhere. And it could be in the dead center of a food plot. It can be on an edge that you don't have overhanging limbs. Whatever. And they'll hit it. They'll almost hit it instantly. And you couple that thing with Scrape Fix makes a thing they call the vine, and it's literally that. It's a synthetic, fake man-made vine. But I'll hang that off a licking branch, and then I'll obviously rip the ground up below it to mock up a scrape. Sometimes I'll put some Scrape Fix in it, whatever. But the reality is that's all of that stuff. I'm not super cognizant about my scent. Heck, through the years, I'd even go out of my way and I'd stop and go to the bathroom in scrapes, and lo and behold, they'd be hammering it that night. I think it's any foreign scent that they don't sense danger that they want to cover with their scent. And the real goal is, number one, get them on camera, but number two, I want to get them conditioned to a scrape, because then when you have a weather event during hunting season, it becomes predictable, right? You got a buck that's comfortable walking daylight. He's hit the scrape religiously for the last month. Now we got some rain. He has to make the rounds and freshen those scrapes.
Right.
So
Yep.
That was kind of a long explanation, but I think you get the point.
No, I get it totally. And, I have theories on scrapes, Curt, and, give me some of your thoughts and ideas on that. I kind of have a idea that, some are, I don't want to call meaningless, but a 1.5-year-old might just, tear the ground up because he's like, man, I just don't know what to do, but I got to tear up this ground. And then there's some that I definitely believe that are hey, these are maybe where just the bucks go, and does kind of come to smell them. And there's some that I believe are totally this is a team, or we'll call it a community scrape. So do you kind of, just make them in hopes that this becomes that dominant buck one, or do you historically know, man, these are the scrapes I have year after year. I'm gonna get these going and fire them up right now around Labor Day when they've shed that velvet, and we'll go from there and see what happens.
It's actually a little of both, Brandon. I mean, my general rule of thumb on a scrape is I don't think a scrape is some guys, basically set their strategy up to hunt a rub line or a scrape line or whatever, right? I truly believe, and I think that I'm sure there's stats that would back something close to this. 90% of scrapes happen at night, right?
Right.
And that happens because that's when the deer are the most active. Well, there's a major difference between the random edge scrape that you're kind of describing, that any buck that starts feeling as though it's, he's marking his territory. That's what they do. But when you find a primary, right? So I consider it primary and secondary. When you find a primary that's the size of literally the size of a truck hood, and it is shredded, that's probably going to happen every year, and I think you use the term a public scrape or whatever. That's the one, if you're going to focus your time and effort on, that's probably the one, because even through the years, I think back on some primary scrapes that I have, in conjunction with the tree stand. And boy, after a rain event, I remember distinctly a couple of years ago, I watched 13 bucks in a 2.5-3 hour afternoon evening sit hit a primary scrape. It was insane. Every buck that was in that section had to come hit that scrape, But on the flip side, I've sat and watched a scrape line down the edge of a cornfield or, on the edge of the timber and watched it for hours, sometimes days after days. And other than a random buck maybe, bumping in there and hitting it, no one cared. And I think that's that secondary scrape,
right.
That buck, for whatever reason, at that moment couldn't help himself. He laid a scrape down. There was a licking branch, and it was basically over. But boy, them primaries, that's a whole different thing, and they're very special. If you have one, at minimum, you got to be running cameras on it. And I'd be careful too, because all I mean by that is you can change a primary to a secondary real quick with pressure. So there's a delicate balance, and from my experience, a primary scrape is never out on the edge. Those primaries seem to be literally in bedding areas or just maybe right next to bedding areas, and you just got to be careful. But it's one of those things, if you have a primary, boy, that's a special spot to run a camera and potentially a special spot to hunt. But you got to hunt it around a weather event, because that's when it's going to be most active. And when them bucks really start getting fired up in mid to late October, they're going to hit those scrapes. I mean, they're starting to hit them scrape lines because, to your point, those does go there to see who's there, right? And if that doe's smelling right, that's where stuff starts to happen.
Yep, for sure. Yeah. No, I'm with you there. That's one of the things I do every year is historically, I had a big farm that I lost, unfortunately, but I knew those scrapes, Curt, just like you're talking about now, and I couldn't wait to get in there and get those cameras on those scrapes and fire them up first and get them good to go, trim the branches that needed to be trimmed so, the camera's in the right spot, and you do all that. And it's just funny, kind of what you talked about. I would see those other scrapes that I'm like, man, I wonder, what's going on here. And lo and behold, I have done that where I put some cameras. Let's just see, and it has taught me so much about which ones are super active, which ones are hit and miss. And, but nonetheless, that's probably one of my favorite times of prep work, let's call it, before the season really gets rolling?
When even I'll give you a pretty good example. Last year, Brandon, the first buck that I was lucky enough to take, I shot him 3 weeks into October or whatever, and it was 100% because of scrape activity, but it was historical scrape activity. You know what I mean? So although I had him on that scrape multiple times after he went hardhorn, what triggered me was I got him at 9 o'clock in the morning hitting the scrape. So I'm like, okay, he's right there. I'm close to him. He's bedding close, or I wouldn't be getting his picture, whatever it was. If I told you it was October 16th, right? And then I looked at the forecast, and we had a weather event coming, right? So the pressure was changing. We got rain overnight. I went and sat that scrape the next day knowing full and well he was going to make his rounds and freshen that thing within probably a 24-hour window. And sure enough, that's the night I killed him. And he was coming right to that scrape to freshen it when I got to drop the string on him. So there's definitely strategy involved with scrapes. I think it's the biggest learning thing is probably how to interpret scrapes and maybe which ones you'd focus your effort on, whether it be, hey, this is the one I'm going to run my camera on, or, hey, this is the one I'm going to try having a legit stand location based around.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So I want to back up or change topics just a little, Curt. So now you have this farm you're going to go, this weekend and visit, but when you first kind of got the opportunity to hunt this place, what was, some of the first couple things you did, Curt? Did you, just walk around? Did you look at aerial photos? Did you look at a topo? So give me the rundown on just your thoughts on how to access and where you thought good pinches were, or where, for you guys and where you thought some food needs to be established. So just run me through the paces on some of those ideas you came up with.
Sure, and I mean, you literally just hit the nail right on the head, Brandon. So it's all of the above, right? So any chance I get to actually get boots on the ground on a farm, I like to do that because you see things, especially if it's late winter or early spring, before things are really lush. It all lays out right in front of you if you'll take the time to interpret it. Right now, I would argue through the years, the one thing I've definitely got better at doing is analyzing aerial pictures, or satellite imagery or whatever of properties, because 9 times out of 10, if there's something geographically special about the farm that's going to create a natural pinch or a funnel or, whatever term you want to, put at it, you can see that from an aerial perspective. So a lot of times I'll even have, on my phone, whether it's Base Map or Onyx or Huntstand, I mean, through the years I've used them all, and actually I have them all on my phone right now. It's interesting because, I'll look at it aerially, and I'll mark some areas that I for sure just want to go investigate. I want to get there and put my eyes on it and see what it really looks like. But 9 times out of 10, it's what it looks like from the air, and you may change something 50 yards one way or the other, but the general concept of why I have an intrigue to go look at that, inside corner, the funnel, a pinch, a crick crossing, all those kind of features, 9 times out of 10, you can find that by looking at it from an aerial picture. Now, I think shed season, and then obviously I'm tore up with shed hunting, but I use shed season to do a lot of scouting. And because, in my opinion, that's the best time of year to read what happens on a farm. You can see all the trails. You can still see last year's scrapes. You obviously can tell what crops were there and if the rotation's going to change or if you see it change year over year. But I think by and large, bedding areas are bedding areas, travel corridors are travel corridors, and year to year they just change. The wind direction may change how a deer uses a piece of a farm, that sort of thing. But it's all of the above, man. That there is no one approach that's right or wrong. I think you got to have a mixed bag of, aerial. You use the topography to your advantage, and then kind of the last thing I would do is how can I put food on there to potentially manipulate movement, right? So they're going to do what they're going to do naturally, but the second you introduce food, it's potentially changing what they've always done, right? So things evolve and you learn. I mean, it's I joke, but I mean, even last year, like the turkey foot deer you and I did a podcast about, Brandon, I probably had like 6 tree stands within a 300-yard radius, but all for different reasons. And then it's just because that is the topography there says this is what you should have, and it just is what it is. Every farm's unique. Every farm's a little different, but the strategy doesn't really change. I'm looking for the same stuff everywhere and then trying to, set the deck so that the wind's in my favor. I can get in and out clean. Maybe even predicting, he's going to come from here and it's going to be a left to right thing and I need to stop him here. Like all that's going through my mind when I'm trimming lanes or not trimming lanes or, boy, there's just a lot to it when you actually start, thinking about it like this. But I think it's one of those things through the years, your eye kind of gets trained for specific features, and that's what you look for, or that's what you create. Yeah,
for sure. I'm with you there. And I don't have the luxury of, like, living on a farm or a piece that I get to hunt. My closest farm in Michigan's 2 hours away. Ohio, where I hunt, lease-wise is 4 hours. This year I'll be in Iowa, it's 9 hours. So one of the things that I have done, Curt, just religiously is studying, aerial photos, and I'm glad you mentioned that. Like from an aerial photo, to me, Curt, like it's kind of, once you get good at it and you start studying it, just your piece, different pieces, you can study. That's the cool thing about aerial photos. You could study any piece and get better at potentially the next hunting ground you get. And, the one thing that doesn't communicate, Curt, and which this, is just when you get there and you finally get those boots on the ground, you're like, whoa, this is way bigger than I would have ever thought, or this bottom's deeper. It's just stuff like that. But at the hunting basics of where you can find a pinch, where you can find an inside corner, all those things are still there, and then you can go walk it with that in mind and put boots on the ground and really get that good studying. But I think that aerial photos, man, it will cheat you so much. Not cheat you, it'll help you. I mean, it's like a cheat code, until you can be there and, just learn those things about, maybe there's a little hogback you couldn't see and now you can see it. Just all that stuff only happens, like you said, when you get boots on the ground.
That's exactly right, Brandon, and that's why I'm saying 9 times out of 10, a feature you pick out from an aerial, you validate it when you're there. Now, it doesn't mean that it's exactly where you thought, but like a pinch is a pinch, right? If it's going to funnel the deer down, it's going to funnel them down, and you may get there and there's not a tree, right? Like you get there and you're like, gosh dang it, there's no way for me to hunt this on a west-northwest wind. Well, then you got to change your mindset. Well, I know they're going to come through here, but boy, I got to be 150 yards the other direction, and that's where, like some of the modern tools we have access to now, like there's blinds that are literally airtight, that you can get away with crazy things in bottoms that, where the wind would normally be swirling. You could never sit a tree stand, but boy, you climb up in like grizzly comes to mind, Titan comes to mind. Like those blinds literally seal airtight,
Sure.
and if it's not plumb airtight, it's so close that if you're cognizant about your scent and sitting in something like that, like, boy, you get away with a lot. You get away with a lot more than you ever would. So you're spot on. I mean, the approach is right, and I think people need to think like that because it can take what would take years and years and years of just visually monitoring what happens on a farm. Most of that picture can be painted with an aerial map in a couple hours of walking around. You'll know how they're going to, roll through there. You just will.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. So on this place, Curt, when you decided like, hey, I'm going to do food or food in this area, was it based on like, this is a spot we can pinch them in, or was it based off of like, hey, we might transfer like grain to green or green to green type of food, and this is just the right area and the wind works here? I know there's so many things, like you got to have a tree and yada, yada, but just your thoughts on, like on this new farm, how you did that.
Yeah, so the new farm we're talking about, for at least for our area, it's fairly wide open, right? So I'm not talking about a big wooded patch. It's a 320 some acre farm. of that, I would tell you that literally 280 of it's pretty open. Like it looks like a big grass field that's got some roll to it. It's got some spotty cedars. It's just broken, kind of, is how I would explain it. It looks more like Kansas than Iowa.
Right.
But there's also some very distinct features. Like there is a fairly decent size, like a 35, maybe 40-acre chunk of timber in the middle, and it's hands down the thickest part of the farm, right? And there's terrain features. I got a water feature on the one side with a river. There's big ag to the north and the west, and big ag, corn and beans, right? Row crop. So in analyzing all of that, like I would make the argument, our deer here in Iowa, like they're not lacking anything, Brandon, because they get to eat just like cattle, right? They're eating corn, they're eating alfalfa, they're eating beans, they're eating, you name it, they got it here. And my objective with food is maybe a little different than some other spots in the country. My objective is much to give them like something that becomes their number one thing. So like you mentioned the green to green transfer, I don't think there's anything better right now than soybeans. Deer in July and August love soybeans. But the second they start to dry up, and get ready to be harvested,
yes,
they're no longer good, right? You got a 10 to 14-day window when they're drying. The deer don't care about them. And then once they're dry, they're good again, right? So you got to have something when they start to transition off the beans, what should they be transferring to? And at least in my opinion, I would put, a daikon or groundhog radish right up there. Good, lush, freshly mowed clover, chicory will do it. You got to have something that becomes their mainstay or their number one priority for green. And if you have that, my argument is now you've concentrated them onto, that half acre, acre and a half, whatever you have in a food plot. You got to have enough diversity that you can keep them coming, right? So whether it's early October when we start hunting or after a couple of frosts and now you're into mid-November and if you're pulling 20 does a night, odds are you're going to have some bucks cruising around in there looking for them, right? So,
yeah.
You transition into late season and it's like something like a brassica as an example. Yeah, they loved the top back in November. Now they're getting after the bulb because it's late December or early January, and they're down eating the actual fruit, right? So I guess all of that kind of plays into my mind, but, like, I'm always looking for something where I can have, something with early season appeal. I'm looking for something with a lot of tonnage like a brassica, but I'm also looking for something sustainable. So, like, I like a mix of purple top, turnips, that daikon or groundhog radish, maybe some kind of cereal grains. It just depends. And like now this year I've introduced some wood peas into some of my food plots. That based on recommendations from a good buddy of mine, and he had incredible luck in Kansas and Missouri. And he said, man, everybody's got plots, and he's kind of not wrong because obviously there's a lot of them on the market, and a lot of guys dabble with food plots. So I brought the peas in the equation thinking, I'll bet I'm the only guy within miles that has winter peas in his food plot around here. So right. We'll see how it plays out. But, I mean, yeah, a lot of my food plots are diverse where a section of it's, clover chicory, and then it transitions into brassicas or brassicas with winter peas. And I may have a spot that's got, oats or, some kind of a cereal grain on it, all just kind of intermingled together with the goal that I always have what they want the most.
For sure. I like that idea too, Curt, because as you know, like deer like to eat, as a browser, so they kind of get in that field now, or food plot as, we call them, and it just makes it a little more comfortable to them where they kind of just keep that like, gingerly little walk, and they keep browsing, they keep moving, and overall that kind of helps too, like your, even their herd stress or social stress where a deer eats and walks through the field and he's off or she's off and the next one comes on. So I like that idea quite a bit.
Yeah, and I mean the other part of that is, I mean, you're on to something there because I do think social stress or like herd stress changes year over year, right? I mean, if you have a bully buck as an example, right, that 8-pointer we all hate, he'll run a food plot and deer will avoid it, where now maybe you got 2 or 3 food plots, like all your deer can be out happily doing their thing and really not affecting each other. I mean, through the years, we've even configured where, like, we have, call it a 6-acre field, and it's all going to be food plot, and the main feature is, say, standing corn, Brandon. I'll split the field, 50% of it's going to be corn, and then I'll run a swath, 20, 24 rows of corn right down the middle of that thing to split the sides, and I'll have, brassicas on one side, and I'll have clover chicory on the other side of the corn screen.
Right.
And it'd blow your mind on watching deer transition and how they use that, and the fact that you could have 2 big mature deer on a 6-acre field, and they both feel like they're running the show because they're on opposite sides of that screen.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I like that idea a lot, and it causes, deer to move. Like some of those deer are going to want to, walk around that corn, and then it gives you a shot opportunity. So all that just comes into such perfect play. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And deer are no different than us. I mean, they're edge animals, number one, but they're also opportunistic, right? They're going to take the easiest path. So guess what? If that happens to be where, you run your ranger and knock some corn down, or you bush hog through corn to create a trail, they use it. And even through the years, like how we configure, so like we plant our corn tight. We put it in 15-inch rows. Traditionally around here, our row crop goes in at 30 inches. Well, a deer can literally disappear into the rows of a farmer's field on 30-inch rows. Our rows force them. Like a big buck does not want to walk through corn and bang into every, they just don't.
Right.
But if you plant like that, you can almost create a natural fence with corn and then create the opening. Like I said, drive a section down or bush hog a section out. That's where they're going. And I guess that's kind of the other side of the food plot scenario is, if it's big and I want to direct them somewhere or pinch them somewhere in that food plot, I will use a crop like corn to do that, because deer are curious too, right? So like the scenario I just gave you where I split a big 6-acre field, like basically put a T in it and split it, deer inevitably, even if the preferred source is brassica, they're going to go eat for a while, and then it's like they almost have to go over and look at that other side because they can't see it. They got to go look and smell, and it works great. You just got to give it some thought on how you plan to hunt it, when you actually configure the food plot.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's one of the reasons I like it too so much, is that curiosity. They want to kind of see, even though we talked about that social structure a little bit, they want to see who's in that field, and it's part of that hierarchy where they're going to go check. And again, it creates that natural movement, which, if I could architect my own place, that's exactly how it would be.
Yeah, in a perfect world, you'd put every food plot like on the crest of the hill, and it falls down both ways with the premise, boy, if I'm in there and I'm rattling on the north end, I can see the deer on the south end, but he can't see me. He has to come up over this crest to figure out if, is that a hunter rattling at me, or is that really a fight going on? I need to get over there and protect my ground,
Yeah.
So
for sure.
And not that every situation is the perfect, or every scenario is not perfect for all of this, but like if you always try to maximize those opportunities with food and manipulating food, that's just doing the best you can at the chess game we call deer hunting.
Yeah, it does, man. It allows some of that, if you can get away with it, like you said, on the right piece of ground. But it's neat, that you can, and you're taking advantage of some of that, Curt. And like obviously you've had huge success in the past with killing some great deer. But from food wise, Curt, do you like to run cameras? Like I know so many guys like to run a camera kind of right in the middle of the food plot to start doing inventory. So as we kind of now transition and talk to inventory for a minute, but do you have a rhyme or reason of, I always wonder this because, again, I don't get to hunt, a food plot per se, but guys just stick a camera in the middle of the food plot, and I'm always like, why is it there? Which way is it facing? Those kind of questions I always want answers to, because that's kind of stuff I don't get to do here in Michigan. So, Curt, tell me, if you do that, how do you do it?
I'm kind of the opposite on that, Brandon. So I'm not going to say that there isn't like times when I almost generically stick a camera in a food plot and just want to get pictures, right? Like who's here. I'm a little different on that. So like I would rather pick maybe a feature of the terrain around me and or like how I expect them to come or go, because part of me interpreting that deer is how did he get in this food plot, and that day, he came from the west. Which way was the wind blowing? Was he quartering into the wind when he walked up here? Will he do that when the wind's blowing from the south, or does he only do that on a north wind? So very seldom will I randomly put a camera on a food plot. If I put it on a food plot, it's to figure out how they're getting to and from, because same thing, like I don't want anyone to think I only sit and hunt these, these perfectly manicured food plots. I'm probably 50-50 on, am I actually sitting in the structure back in the timber or on the ridge versus right on the food? Because as you know, I mean, it is hard to hunt right on the food because you got to get in and out of there.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I'm not on the food. I want to be using the food to predict where he's going to come from. And then once I understand that, I'm setting up maybe 50, 60, 80, 100 yards away from the food in a pinch. Like, so he's coming from the west. I have a very strong, indication on that because of the pictures and stuff. I set up where he has to then be forced to walk by me. I'm not going to random it, let him get out in a big food plot, and, yeah, you get to see him, and it's eye candy, and that's all fun and good. But, boy, once they're out in a 2-3 acre food plot, you getting a shot, that's up to the guy in the sky. I'd rather put myself somewhere where if he's heading to that food plot, he's going to walk through here, and it's going to put him sub 30 yards to me, or that kind of scenario.
Yeah. No, that's well said. That's a well thought out answer, and that makes total sense to me. Whether you did it man-made like timber stand improvement or just a natural pinch / funnel, fence gap or whatever, if you can get in those situations, and again, like I said, either way, man-made or just natural, that gives you such opportunity to get that zero, what Curt's talking about, that 0 to 30 yard shot, man. And otherwise, those food plots, they are great, and there's pros and cons, and Curt just hit it like out of the ballpark with that answer, because, he could be on the other side. Well, 6 acres away doesn't do you any good. You're not flinging an arrow at him.
Well, and I mean, we're talking about food plots extensively, on today's podcast, but like, even if you don't, to your point, Brandon, you don't get to do a lot of the stuff we do from a management perspective, or you're talking about TSI and hinge cutting and food plots. Like, that's all fine and good where you can do it because you're trying to, improve or do the best you can do with what you got. The reality is, even in nature, right? So you find a white oak stand that's got trees loaded with acorns, and you find that right now, you can bet dollars to donuts. You put a camera there, that will be the draw of that area. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
So now figure out, where's the pinch leading to or going away from that place, or where are they betting to get there? You get yourself somewhere in the middle. I mean, I've enjoyed a couple hunts in the hardwoods where there's so many acorns hitting the ground, it literally sounds like it's raining. You want to hear deer coming like somebody's ringing a dinner bell. It's insane. If you can find those kind of features in nature, that's really what you're looking for as a deer hunter. So like I said, whether it's man-made or manipulated or plumb natural, doing your homework and finding those kind of things to take advantage of, that's the difference between being serious and getting lucky.
Yeah. No, that's so true, Curt. And I know on so many hunts where, time was against me or something like that, where, a certain time of year, and it always coincides with these acorns, man. When the cameras stop, we stop seeing deer on main food sources, you can guarantee it's because of those acorns in it. And the power to that, Curt, it's kind of like something we don't really stress enough, because it's the power of food. It's just inside the timber.
Well, and I mean, like you brought up green to green transfer, like that's incredibly powerful, but like same thing. I mean, deer only get to eat those fresh dropped acorns for a short window every year. It's the same exact phenomenon happens with a pear or an apple tree, right? So,
right.
if you're lucky enough that your season opens early enough when those apples are falling, or you have a late dropping variety, there's nothing that draws deer better than an apple tree for a while, right? Or persimmon tree or oak tree dropping acorns. It's just a natural phenomenon, and if you've done your homework and know, hey, I got this apple tree, it's loaded with apples, put a camera there. You will know instantly when that thing's on fire, and if you've done your homework, now you already set yourself up to go hunt, per se, that apple tree, even if you're not hunting on that apple tree. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes we're our own worst enemies because we think, oh, I got to be on this cornfield or I got to be on the edge of the bean field. And in reality, it's like, man, if you'd have walked the next 60 yards and been 30 yards deeper into the timber, you'd have killed a deer on that acorn tree every night, 9 nights in a row because he was there, but you weren't.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of truth to that. And, like I said, I'll be the first to admit it, that sometimes that stuff is just so overlooked. And like you said, we're our worst own enemies, and there's no reason for it. You have to value those types of food that they like when they like them. And like you said, that cool thing about those things, especially like an apple tree or the white oaks, is like you said, it does happen once a year to where it's a draw magnet. They will be there. It's just figuring out on your piece of ground or a piece of public that has those items that this is the time of year to do it, and you can go in there and really sometimes, slay a good one.
And really, this right now, I mean, literally right now is the time you'd be out scouting, apple trees, anywhere you have a prevalent stand of oaks. Figure it out. Like even white oaks, they don't have a good mass crop every year. It's typically every other, and I'd say the same thing with most natural apple trees. Year to year, one year they'll have 10,000 apples, the next they have 500. I mean, there's still apples there, but one year it's going to hunt a lot better than the year previous, or vice versa, or however you want to look at it. But it's all that stuff.
Yep.
I just think you got to take what's available to you and make the best you can make of it. And whether it's acorns, apples, pears, or food plots, they all hypothetically are doing the same thing.
Yeah. No, super, super valid point, and it's just something that's such a great reminder to kind of, almost every piece of ground has oaks, and every piece of ground, if you have timber, and some places are lucky enough to have apple trees or an old orchard somewhere, and those are just things you got to really kind of key in on and learn that property and learn, which oaks are producing this year or next, and the same with the apple trees, but super valid point, Curt. That's pretty spot on. It's awesome.
And I guess the other thing I would mention, that now that we're on this topic, Brandon, one super overlooked thing is water. And I know that sounds crazy, but same thing, these deer have to drink, okay? So if you don't have a water feature on your farm, there's not a natural creek or a river or a pond or whatever, it may be an opportune time to introduce something, right? And it doesn't take much to create a little water hole. All of a sudden, that's got the pull of a food plot or an apple tree or whatever, and deer got to drink. I mean, they have to. So I'd be pretty remiss not to at least mention that, because I think that's a very overlooked potential strategy, as well as creating water holes and or using them to your advantage, because inevitably deer are going to go there.
Yeah. No, it's a super slick idea, and you can do it man-made, as far as we've all seen the videos of guys using the kiddie pools. I really like the idea of, I've seen guys using basically the horse trough or feeding trough, and now guys are burying it, filling it with water. If you don't have it, you can bring that and make it or establish it, like Curt is saying. And now it's just one more thing that your property has, as far as a draw. It's a drawing power. It's somewhat of a magnet to keep deer around it. But especially, deer need it all the time anyways. We all need water, so, it makes total sense. But, they'll take those breaks during the rut, and lots of times I've seen, you probably have too, Curt, like some super awesome trail camera photos where a buck's been running. It's 11 a.m. and he's over somewhere, refilling that water tank,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And if you haven't seen it, you just haven't been in the woods because, I mean, it happened. I've just buck stopped at a creek, and it's like he can't drink enough, and it seems like he's there for 5 minutes. You know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, water features, all of this stuff is the same. It's just, you know, a different time, a different approach. You got to, you know, some of it's timely, some of it's not. And some of it, yeah, I mean, I'll still thank the Lord every time I shoot a deer that I got lucky enough to be there, you know, when he happened to be there. I just like to try creating my luck by giving myself scenarios that up the odds of him being there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you're putting in the work to make every one of those, you know, spots like that, you know, are they totally fulfilled with everything a piece of property needs? And if you're lucky enough to check off all those items, man, it just helps keep deer on the property. And I believe too, Curt, like we talked about social stress, it even eliminates some of that. You know, I don't know if there's data to prove it, but if you have everything, you know, they don't have to go anywhere. There's no reason to be stressed. There's no reason to be malnourished. And they seem to live on your property a lot more, or visit a lot more. And those are just all things that you can now start making that plan to hunt around. Where can I sit? Where are they coming from? Yada, yada, yada. It's like you said, that's just being part of the chessboard, you know, and you're playing. So, you know, this time of year, man, there's a few things. That's why we're doing this podcast, you know, just a few things like that you can knock off the list that hopefully make you, you know, a better, more successful hunter come October, November.
Yeah, it's a lot of little things all combined into one big strategy, right? And I would never say one of them substantially more important than the other. I mean, at the core of this whole thing, Brandon, you've heard me say this 1,000 times. There's truly only two things to killing big deer, and it's food and pressure. And not one and not to the other. And the other thing a lot of people forget, you can't what's not there. You know what's there is because you monitored what's there. So even if apple trees put all apples in September, but you can't hunt till October, boy, I'd still have a camera there taking inventory on who's walking around on my farm hardhorn in September and was just pounding this apple tree. Because odds are he's still there when October rolls around. He's just not going to be on that tree because the apples are all off. You know, it doesn't mean the deer's not there. It means he's right there, but now he's transitioned to something else. You better be thinking, right, where's he going once the apples are gone, right?
Yeah. No, that's super valid point. You know, that's so spot on. You know, if you can figure out anywhere where potentially deer are feeding and you can get that intel, it's so important because, like you said, especially, I mean, to me, Curt, and you, maybe I'm wrong, but after Labor Day kind of really tells me, you know, who's going to be there and who's not, versus what I've seen in June and July in bachelor groups, right? And as soon as that hard horn, you know, trail camera photos pop, I'm like, all right, I got this one. Well, I got 3 out of 6 bucks, you know, like, all right, this is potentially game changing just to have that information. It's that important. And like Curt said, like, you don't necessarily have to hunt that spot to get that info, but that info changes everything. You know what I mean, Curt?
Oh, there's no question. And that's why I always kind of chuckle, like, it's not a surprise to me that, you know, it's the same group of guys over and over and over that are shooting big deer. And I'm like, yes, they're lucky, you know, and obviously they live somewhere that, you know, gives them opportunities to even hunt deer of that caliber. But the reality is most of those guys are creating a lot of their luck. And I'm not saying by food plots or, you know, all the stuff we can do on private land. They're doing that extra work. They're figuring out what's going on in that piece of public, or, gosh, all the pressure always comes up from the south. I'm going to come in a different way, you know, or it's just the creative thing. I mean, everyone knows the deer are smart, and I'm a true believer. Deer are not smart. They're instinctive. We're smart.
Right.
I think we overthink things, or maybe even underthink on what truly deter and or attract a deer like that, and then avoid him. You know, don't pressure him. Let him be perfectly calm and natural and doing his thing, and why you slip an arrow through him. He didn't even know he was getting hunted. You know, so it's I love the analogy that it's a chess game because, I mean, really it is. That's all about it.
Yeah. Hey, Curt, you there? I think I lost you for a second.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. There we go. Sorry. Got you back. But you're
weird.
exactly right. Exactly right with that analogy. And that's what's so great is even if you have 5 acres or state land, there's all kinds of items that you can do and tasks like this or a big giant farm that you can keep knocking off that checklist to kind of put together that big giant puzzle or move, checkers on the board and become more successful. And, it's just neat to hear how everybody does it. And I love to hear how Curt does it. Obviously, Curt, man, you've shot some amazing deer, and just your knowledge of doing it in different scenarios. You've said on this podcast, hey, I don't just sit on a food plot, I hunt the timber. This is why I hunt the timber. There's just so many scenarios, and it just kind of communicates to everybody, you have to hunt what's available to you and figure that out. And once you do, it will really start to change stuff for you.
That's exactly right. And I mean, like I said, I feel blessed to live where I live in Iowa and have the opportunity to pursue, large antlered bucks. But at the end of the day, killing a mature deer is really what we're all trying to do as good stewards and deer hunters. And the reality is, I don't care. In Michigan, if your 5-year-old buck's 120 inches, that's just as legit as a 200-inch 5-year-old dying in Iowa. I mean, you're killing the per se smartest buck on your farm because he's the most mature, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah, you are.
That same stuff applies. I don't care if you're public, if you're private, if you're in Iowa, if you're in Michigan. It doesn't matter. We're all playing the same game. It's just a matter of, kind of what level do you take it to?
Yep, for sure. So I know we're getting close, Curt. I know on time you probably got to get going here, but do you already kind of have established some inventory, or are you excited about any deer you potentially might lined up to be hunting?
Yeah, I got, I'll have to send you a few pictures, Brandon, but I mean, I definitely have 3 deer on my radar right now. It's fairly similar to last year, where I have history with them. I know them. They're on my cameras. I might have their sheds. I may not, but that sort of history, and all 3 of them have surfaced. It looks like all 3 of them made fairly substantial jumps, and I don't want to, jinx myself or whatever, but I mean, I definitely have 3 deer that are gonna gross at Boone or maybe better than Boone.
Wow.
So I'm excited. I'm hoping if it's anything like last year, it'll be a banner year, and it seems to be setting up like that. So yeah. Fingers are crossed.
Yeah, for sure, man. As always, man, I wish you the best of luck. And we haven't even really got a chance to even mention what's going on at Xpedition, man. You guys rocking out bows and hardly have time to see family, or what's going on?
It's still incredibly busy. I mean, like a lot of the manufacturers this year, I mean, we had a lot of supply chain issues, and an overwhelming response to the X Series was nice to see. And it's been a trying year, Brandon, because we can't get bows out fast enough. And anyone that's listening, that's waiting on one, please be patient. We are diligently pounding away at it. But yeah, we're hoping that the new vibe, it seems like the industry really got a shot in the arm, through this COVID stuff. I hope that lives on, man. I hope the trend tags being up and just nuts, and I hope that continues on and we've got more people involved in it. But yeah, I just want to, we're working our tails off to try to keep up both with the constraint under with some suppliers and stuff, also just the sheer demand and the kind of the rebirth in the industry. It's refreshing to see. It's awesome. Yeah,
that's awesome, man. And, everybody can reach out, Xpeditionarchery.com. You can find a local dealer. And, Curt, man, I can't wait till, October rolls around. We're 50-something days away. And best of luck, man. I hope I get a phone call, a text, the whole 9 yards, and we're chatting again on the podcast.
That will be the goal, Brandon, and good luck to you guys and all the listeners out there. I mean, this is a fun time of year. Make sure you're out there shooting your bow. There's no such thing as being over-prepared. So. Yeah, that's for sure. That's one thing we didn't even mention in this, and I know we covered a lot on this last-minute checklist. But, yeah, absolutely, shoot those bows and,
as always, guys, we'll see you again next week. But if you get a chance, make sure to leave us a review on iTunes. I don't ask that very often, but I'm going to ask today. And Curt, thanks, and we'll do this again real soon.
Sounds good. Take care.